The siren screamed through the golden quiet of a California afternoon, slicing through the warm stillness like a blade through glass. The sound didn't just echo, it shattered. It tore across the empty four-lane highway, scattering flocks of startled birds and bouncing off the distant desert hills. Rookie Officer Ethan Cole slammed his cruiser to a stop in the center of the road, tires shrieking against asphalt that shimmered in the heat. His hands were tight around the steering wheel, knuckles white, heart hammering so hard it felt like it was going to burst out of his chest. His chest rose and fell fast, sweat clinging to his temples beneath the brim of his cap. It was only his third month on duty, 3 months of long shifts, silent judgment from senior officers, and the endless shadow of a legacy he was still trying to live up to. His father's badge, polished, heavy, and sacred, gleamed faintly on his uniform. The same badge his father had worn on the day he never came home. Before we go any further, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and humanity even in the hardest moments, make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kindness Vibes. Because what happens next will remind you how one decision, one mistake, can change everything you think you know about courage. Ethan stepped out of the car, his boots clicking sharply against the asphalt. The light was blinding, that kind of California gold that made everything too real, too exposed. Ahead of him stood a Harley-Davidson gleaming under the sun, its chrome catching the light like mirrors of truth. The man beside it didn't move. He was tall, a mountain of muscle under a black leather vest that read Hell's Angels across the chest. His arms were covered in faded tattoos, the kind you could tell had stories behind them. There was gray in his beard, a hard calm in his eyes. He didn't look like the men Ethan had been trained to fear, the reckless, dangerous, defiant ones. No, this man was still in a way that was unsettling, as if he had seen the world's chaos and made peace with it. Ethan's voice came out shakier than he wanted. He followed procedure, demanded identification, read rights, did everything by the book. He had to. This was the kind of stop that could define his career, or end it. Dispatch had sent out an alert earlier that afternoon about a suspect on the run, last seen wearing a biker vest just like this one. Ethan had been patrolling nearby, desperate for a chance to prove himself, desperate to show he wasn't just the son of a fallen hero. He was his own man, his own officer. But as he locked the cold metal of the handcuffs around the stranger's wrists, something inside him twisted. The man, Ray Dalton, according to his ID, didn't resist. He didn't even look angry. He just stood there, the cuffs biting into his weathered skin, eyes filled with something that shouldn't have been there, pity. The world felt strangely quiet then. His radio crackled faintly, but even that sound faded behind the soft rustle of wind sweeping through the distant fields. An American flag hung limp beside an old gas station sign, swaying lazily as if nothing in the world was wrong. But something was wrong. Ethan could feel it in his gut. This wasn't the man they were looking for. The timing didn't match. The plate didn't match. The description was off. But he had already acted. He had already made the call. Ray Dalton had spent 20 years on the road. 20 years trying to find peace in motion, meaning in noise. He was a combat veteran, 2 tours overseas, 2 brothers buried under foreign skies. When he came home, there was no home left. The faces he knew had faded, the world had moved on. The only family that remained was the one he found on the open road, a brotherhood of men who understood silence, loss, and loyalty. The Hell's Angels weren't perfect, but they were his. And now, cuffed and silent, he was watching a young man make the same mistake life had made with him, judging before understanding. As Ethan led him toward the cruiser, the world slowed down. The sky above was endless blue, birds crossing lazily overhead. A few cars drove by, slowing just enough to capture the scene on their phones. The flashing red and blue lights made it look like a victory, a good bust, for the rookie, but it felt like anything but that. Ethan's throat was dry. His hands trembled slightly as he guided Ray to the back seat. Why isn't he saying anything? Ethan thought. Why isn't he angry? Then, the silence broke, not with words, but with sound. A low, distant hum began to roll across the horizon. It started as a vibration in the soles of Ethan's boots, faint, like a memory, then grew louder. Deeper. Stronger. He turned his head, and what he saw made his pulse stop. Over the rise of the highway, dark shapes began to form. 1, 2, 10, 20, then dozens. Dozens of motorcycles, sunlight glinting off their chrome, roaring like thunder across the desert. The sound grew until it became a living thing, a wave of power and loyalty moving as one. Ethan froze. His heart slammed against his ribs as the convoy of Hell's Angels filled the highway end to end, their engines rumbling in perfect unison. They weren't coming fast. They weren't reckless. They were purposeful. They parked in formation behind Ray, their brother, each one silent, waiting. The air vibrated with the hum of idling engines. Ethan felt like he was standing in the middle of a heartbeat, one that didn't belong to him. Ray turned his head slightly, his cuffed hands glinting in the sun. "They came for me," he murmured softly, not in defiance, but in recognition. Ethan's knees nearly buckled. He could feel the weight of 100 stairs pressing against him. He wasn't facing criminals. He was facing something he couldn't understand, a code of brotherhood, of pain, of loyalty that didn't need permission or law to exist. For the first time since his father's funeral, Ethan felt small. Not weak, just human. The badge on his chest no longer felt like pride. It felt like a burden. He could hear his father's voice echoing from somewhere deep in his memory. "Courage isn't in the arrest, son. It's in knowing when to let go." The rookie's breath came out uneven. He wanted to call for backup, to make it all official, clean, defensible. But before he could reach for his radio, Ray lifted his cuffed wrist slightly. His voice, calm and worn by time, broke through the tense silence like mercy itself. "It's okay, kid," he said quietly. "We all make mistakes." That was it. Just 8 words. But they hit harder than any order, any reprimand, any gunshot. Ethan blinked hard, fighting the sting behind his eyes. Around him, the 100 engines continued to idle, rumbling like thunder waiting for permission to storm. But Ray didn't move. He didn't fight. He didn't accuse. He just was. Standing there in quiet dignity, giving the young officer something his own guilt wouldn't let him give himself: forgiveness. Ethan reached for his key. His fingers trembled so badly he dropped it once. When he finally found the lock, the handcuffs clicked open with a sound that would echo in his memory for the rest of his life. Ray rubbed his wrists gently, not saying a word. Then he looked Ethan in the eye, not with judgment, but with something far harder to bear: understanding. He turned, lifted his hand toward the wall of bikes, and instantly, one by one, the engines went silent. The world stopped moving. The air was still again. The quiet was almost holy. Ethan swallowed hard, his throat tight, heart heavy. He wanted to speak, to apologize, but no words felt enough. Ray nodded once, a gesture that said "you're forgiven," then walked back to his Harley, mounted it with the ease of a man who'd done it 10,000 times, and started the engine. The rest followed, hundreds of bikes roaring to life in perfect harmony, the thunder of loyalty rolling away down the highway until only dust and sunlight remained. Ethan stood there long after they were gone. The siren lights still flashing weakly behind him, the flag still swaying in the breeze. He unclipped his radio, turned it off, and sank to his knees beside the cruiser, burying his hands in his hair. He wasn't crying out of fear anymore. He was crying because for the first time in his life, he understood. He understood his father's words. He understood courage. He understood humanity. That day, something inside him changed forever. From that moment on, every stop, every decision, every heartbeat under that uniform carried the memory of the mistake that taught him compassion. He never forgot Ray Dalton, or the wall of bikers that came for him, not as a threat, but as a reminder that brotherhood isn't bound by law, and forgiveness isn't weakness. If this story touched your heart, if you believe the world needs more compassion, more forgiveness, more humanity, please like, share, and subscribe to Kindness Vibes. Because every story we tell here reminds us that one act of empathy can rewrite even the hardest chapters. And before you go, tell us in the comments, what would you have done if you were in Ethan's place? Would you have had the courage to admit the mistake, or the heart to let someone go?